Hey there, internet friends, and welcome to That D Plus Show. Class is in session for the only show from that nerdy site that lets you know what kind of quality to expect right from the name. I'm your host, Trevor Starkey, and each week we dive into a different Disney Plus offering and discuss its history, how it holds up today, and our general impressions. This show is made possible entirely by the support of our patrons over at patreon.com/thatnerdysite, so if you like the show and you can support us over there, we would appreciate it, but if you can't, no big deal. The fact that you're listening is awesome, and of course, we would love it if you like, subscribe, rate, review, share the podcast with your friends, all that fun stuff. Joining me today, we have Logan Wilkinson. How you doing, Logan?
I'm doing wonderful.
Excellent. And Frank Bazzani back. How you doing, Frank?
Doing good.
Yes, so today we are going to be talking all about The Simpsons Treehouse of Horror, specifically the first 3 Treehouse of Horror episodes. And this will probably turn into like a new annual thing we do for that D Plus show in the Halloween season. Originally, this was going to be last week's episode on the schedule, but we had to kind of make some last minute adjustments due to some illness and stuff. And as I mentioned, I think to somebody off air, I actually almost appreciate this better, that this is now kind of can like easily slot into like, this will be the one we do right before Halloween or right on Halloween or whatever. Because that's pretty much when the Treehouse of Horror episodes typically end up landing. So yeah, of course, we are doing this to wrap up our Halloween 2021 month on That D Plus show. Kicked off with the Marvel's zombies, Marvel's What If zombies. Then what do? We talked about Lego Star Wars Terrifying Tales. We talked about Muppets Haunted Mansion. Last week we talked about Halloween Town 2 Calabar's Revenge. And now we're wrapping up here with Simpsons Treehouse of Horror. Update that I shared with these guys because they actually like posted something public. But that little like trivia thing that we alluded to last week of like, oh, it seems that like Marnie and Cal ended up together. They went a little viral on Twitter today because they basically recreated one of like the publicity shots from Halloween Town 2 Calabar's Revenge. Actually, the publicity shot that I used in the video version of the episode last week, they recreated that together like in today's setting, just without Luke, and made a little TikTok video or something for that I saw going around, making the rounds on the Twitters. So shout out to them, I guess. 20 years later, going strong.
Yeah, I was reading. They've been together for like years now. There was like a whole LA Times like really long feature, not about them, but about like Kimberly J. Brown. So by extension, he was referenced in it. That came out like last year for like what she was doing in terms of like special Halloween stuff during COVID. And it went into like her whole journey. It was very good.
There you go. So a little follow up to last week's trivia. Yeah. But yes, diving in here with the Treehouse of Horror, we are doing specifically Treehouse of Horror 1, which actually doesn't actually have the 1 on it, but that is Season 2, Episode 3. Treehouse of Horror 2, Season 3, Episode 7 technically, but because Disney Plus has removed the Stark Raving Dad episode, it will be Episode 6 on the Disney Plus app. And you'll only see it really as episode 7 if you have like the DVD box set kind of thing.
What on Stark Raven Mad or Stark Raven Dad got it pulled? Do you know?
It got pulled because of the Michael Jackson nature of it. It got pulled basically, and they've removed it from like syndication and stuff too, around the like what Neverland documentary or whatever that kind of came out around the time that like Disney Plus was launching a couple years ago, I think. Basically they were like, just easier to not, celebrate the fact that this is very clearly a Michael Jackson centric episode, which is really unfortunate because it's like a really good episode. And it's such a great episode for like the Bart and Lisa dynamic in particular. So it's unfortunate that like it has been pulled, but I also understand, the reason for that. And then also Treehouse of Horror 3, Season 4, Episode 5. Before we hop in, what's everybody's kind of history with like Simpsons / Simpsons Treehouse of Horror stuff? Frank, let's start with you.
Yeah, growing up, I was a huge fan of The Simpsons, and I watched it all the time. And that kind of goes with the extension of Treehouse of Horror. where I definitely remember watching those, especially around Halloween time. They would always get like the replay value out of like all the old Treehouse of Horror episodes, because I watched these mainly in like syndication of just like reruns.
Yep.
And then like I watched some of the newer episodes, but those were so much fewer and far between in my world, where it's like this one episode on Sunday night, and then it's like, oh, here's 10 episodes in the week that are from like the 90s and the early 2000s. But so yeah, like I watched it all the time, like it was on like every night, so I would definitely watch it all the time. And then Treehouse of Horror is definitely always a great time. And it was funny because like looking back, I don't remember them, like the Treehouse of Horror specifically. Like I couldn't remember like what is in what Treehouse of Horror or anything like that. But then getting into it further and like watching these, I would like it started to all click and like come back. And even I started to remember jokes and bits like before they happened. And I was like, yeah, this is great. It was like a fun like nostalgia trip.
Yeah. How about you, Logan?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, literally in me and Frank's case, we can't remember a world before The Simpsons because it's existed our entire life, which is a testament to the show. But even like putting that aside, The Simpsons is such a weird show where like I don't have a moment when I knew of The Simpsons. It's just like always been like a cultural phenomenon that's been like ingrained in pop culture since I like have any sort of waking memory. So like as long as I can remember, I remember The Simpsons and watching episodes either on Fox or on like syndication on like TBS or FX when I went to there. And so for me, it is such a blur, even more so because there are like 30 seasons now, but like it's all blurred together in terms of like where do episodes fall in like the timeline and the rankings, right? Like I've never done a like Simpsons rewatch. I know like the kind of general eras that I know and love, but not particularly much deeper beyond like what is each individual season. But I mean, yeah, I mean, The Simpsons is a classic. I mean, it is The Simpsons, right? It is sort of the genesis of every animated show of the last 30 plus years. And Treehouse of Horror similarly is just like so ingrained in pop culture, I feel like. I found it really interesting personally going back to these first three, and I'm really glad we did because they are very different than like the image of Treehouse of Horror I have in my head in a lot of ways. And I actually really enjoyed it. And so I'll be curious to see like the evolution of this as we go forward in the next few years. Because I really liked some of these episodes.
Yeah. So for me, as the old man on the show, I do remember, like, I mean, I don't know how well I remember, but I was definitely around for a few years before The Simpsons took off. And I remember, like, being, like, into The Simpsons, like, my whole childhood kind of thing. And that was, like, the glory years of The Simpsons, starting in 89. I would have been, like, 4, basically. And so, like, yeah, it was something that we watched as a family kind of thing, which is weird, but it's the kind of thing that, like, the jokes went over my head and my sister's head, but my dad and mom would like them or something like that. And then as it started going into syndication, this is a show that went into syndication super early. Like, you're talking like TNT and Spike or whatever. And I remember it being like syndication on like the WB pre-CW or UPN, and it being like on those like 5 nights a week kind of thing. And so yeah, like it was like just a constant presence through like my childhood. It will not show up on camera or whatever, but like the shelf that is here that I'm like, if I pull this cushion down, is all of the Simpsons DVDs that like they made up until they stopped making them, really. Which like because they never finished, like they never made it all the way to like the current seasons that were happening at the time. And then by the time they would have gotten that far, DVDs just stopped being a thing. So now they've probably moved on to Blu-rays or whatever. And I just never got that set. But yeah, I have all those again, like we were talking right before I think we started. Like I've watched every episode of like Futurama and I've watched every episode with like the DVD commentary multiple times. Same with like all of those seasons of The Simpsons. Like that is what I would do in college, basically, was like go back and watch all of those DVDs and hear all the DVD commentary and stuff and learn all the the ins and outs. And then at some point around that time, I also like, because I was by then I was like a super lapsed. I probably missed like seasons, 15 through 20 or something like that as they were like airing. But I, pulled them up on Hulu or something like that and just kind of binged through and was at some point in time in the last 10 years like all caught up. And then life got away from me, and I didn't like I have not watched an episode of Simpsons probably since like season 30, and they are on season 33 now. And I'm sure there were like a lot of like the later 20s that I missed as well. But I had a friend who was a director of one of the shows I did back when I did the Mousetrap. He directed that, and like one of his like icebreaker getting to know you things was that he has never missed an episode of The Simpsons, like airing live, basically. Like he always watched growing up, and then like continuing on into like adulthood and with his family now, like he watches every Sunday when there's a new episode of The Simpsons on. And so yeah, it was definitely like a like defining presence of my childhood, and also like a defining like factor in, I'm sure, my humor and my approach to comedy, and stuff over the years, and just my flavors and tastes, and in particular in these episodes, like the fact that we get in the very first Treehouse of Horror, the Raven, basically just like the Simpsons version of the Raven, in 8th grade, I think it was, in my 8th grade theater class, before I was doing theater, we had to do a monologue, and I did like the first 5 or 6 stanzas of The Raven as my monologue. And then I have since done it as like a full piece performance, because a friend of mine would do like every Halloween, he would do like basically like a staged reading of like spooky stories and scary stories and stuff. And he invited me to do it once. And I was like, cool. Can I do like The Raven? Because I love that poem. And I did like the whole thing. And so like, I still have like a lot of it memorized, or if I don't have it memorized, like as I'm hearing James Earl Jones, like say the lines, I'm right there along with him, for so much of it. Especially like the first chunk of it is much more ingrained in my mind, but like all throughout, like and realizing that this would have probably been my introduction to Edgar Allan Poe, as like 5-year-old Trevor or whatever, and I didn't know what was going on until years later, and I started like doing more like analysis of it. But the fact that like it all tied back to the second season of The Simpsons, being my own personal history with that poem, was a fascinating little bit. And yeah, like I mean the Treehouse of Horror episodes in particular are just always such a fun like diversion from the normal. It's where they can be extra weird, in the same way that like Futurama had their like anthology, their own anthology of like what if kind of stuff as well, where they could just kind of like split away and tell like smaller stories that aren't really canon in canon kind of thing. And so yeah, I love getting to just kind of hop back into these. And I mentioned when we were talking, I think last week, about like Halloween Town, or before before we recorded or whatever last week, the fact that like a couple of the most iconic ones that I think of when I think of Treehouse of Horror aren't here yet. We haven't gotten to them by the end of these first 3 episodes. But I like still so much of it came back. And I mean, the fact that like one of the ones we get in here is the monkey's paw. I referenced when we talked about it on the Terrifying Tales Lego Star Wars thing, because they do the Wookiee's paw, and basically it's like a complete lift of that story of this concept, which admittedly like is not a unique concept to The Simpsons. It was a kind of a scary story before The Simpsons, but like so many other things in my life, I know the Simpsons version of it before I knew the real thing. Like I've seen so many elements of Citizen Kane, despite never having seen the movie Citizen Kane, because it's like the most referenced thing on The Simpsons. Or I remember like the birds I knew of from The Simpsons before I knew the Hitchcock film. And
King Kong, right, is also one of the.
I mean, yeah, that's in here obviously, yeah, as well. So yeah, like that's definitely my own personal history with The Simpsons, is like it being my introduction to so many pop culture ideas.
beats, yeah.
I mean, like the Shining, the one of the ones that I'm alluding to is like
Yeah.
the Shining episode that is not one of these ones, but like I knew that I could like quote that entire sequence long before I ever knew of like the actual Shining. And despite it, like I've still never seen the actual Shining, but like I know the Shining because of The Simpsons. So yeah.
I think that's a great point though, because I definitely feel the same even from my side of like I feel like there's so many things I saw that I just associated with like The Simpsons or even some of these other like adult animated shows that I grew up watching that are just referencing something else. And I think what's funny is like Treehouse of Horror is like the greatest example of that when we go back and watch it now, because now seeing these small little bits, I'm like, oh, this is like you said, like, oh, this is The Shining, or like this is one of the ones like the one with the house and kind of the first episode is like that's like Poltergeist almost, where especially with they're on the Indian burial ground, and I'm just like, oh yeah, they're just like able to take stories and plots from these other like horror things or like something from like Edgar Allan Poe, and they can kind of repurpose it in this new light. And it's just so funny where now as an adult I'm like, oh wow, I didn't even realize that was like a play on a thing. I just thought it was like something they wrote and like we're doing, you know.
Yeah. All right. Well, yeah, let's dive into a little bit of the history lesson on this one. So the first episode was originally released on October 25th, 1990. Episode 2 was originally released on Halloween Day, October 31st, 1991. The first time, of course, that would happen. I think it didn't happen again until, I might have a trivia thing on it later, I think like Treehouse of Horror 11 or something like that, just because of obviously the calendars and stuff. And then Treehouse of Horror number 3 happened 29 years ago as of the day this goes live, October 29th, 1992.
I was alive.
You was that the first one you were alive for?
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Yeah, also my grandmother's birthday. Other releases of the time, so I didn't do like I did not do a comprehensive like one for each, but for each of these I threw in just today because I was like, I should find something in there. And I basically found the horror movie that came out that month for each of these. And so in 1990, Night of the Living Dead came out October 19th. In 1991, on October 11th, we got Ernest Scared Stupid, which is another
classic,
like iconic one that scared the crap out of me, and probably was like the earliest example of like why I don't like horror movies. And then in 1992, we got another one that is amusing now, some 29 years later, because it was the Candyman, the original Candyman film, which just recently got a reboot or / continuation, like a reboot, I think is kind of what they pitched that one as. But yeah, just it's another one of those cases of like, well, just time repeating. We've had that come up a couple times in this. Obviously, each of these have a runtime of approximately 23 minutes. In the Simpsons timeline of things, the first Treehouse of Horror came between the episodes between Simpson and Delilah, and 2 cars in every garage and 3 eyes on every fish. Episode 2 came between Like Father, Like Clown and Lisa's Pony. And episode 3 came between Lisa the Beauty Queen and Itchy and Scratchy the movie.
Also classics.
Yeah. So the roll call here, we'll run through the directors first. And there's like for directors and writers and the cast here, like I've done a couple Simpsons episodes in the past, and pretty much rather than go through like their whole thing, it's just we're going to talk about how many episodes of The Simpsons they did. So the first episode, the first Treehouse of Horror, was actually directed by 3 people because they basically broke out each sequence, each of the stories to their own director. Wesley Archer directed the first sequence, the Bad Dream House sequence. He would direct 26 episodes of The Simpsons between 1990 and 1996. Rich Moore directed the Hungry Are the Damned sequence, and he did 17 episodes between 1990 and 1993. And David Silverman directed The Raven, who would go on to do 73 episodes between 1989 and 2015. for the second episode here, Jim Reardon would go on to direct. I think he has the largest tenure of anybody in here, apart from the actors. He's directed 187 episodes of The Simpsons, and all of that was between 1990 and 2005. So shout out to him and that very prestigious career there. And then the third one, one of the lower end side of things in here, Carlos Baeza or Baeza did 9 episodes between 1991 and 1994. The writers, all of these have multiple writers involved, of course. But again, for episode 1, they broke it out by each sequence. And John Schwartzwelder did the Bad Dream House sequence. One of the, I think, most praised and most prolific writers of The Simpsons would go on to write 59 episodes between 1990 and 2003, and is often very fondly looked on as like the, he has like the most hits during like the golden era of The Simpsons, especially if you listen to all the DVD commentary tracks. Jay Kogan and Wallace Wolodarski did Hungry Are the Damned. They both, I believe they're pretty much a writing team. They did 10 episodes between 1990 and 1993. And then Edgar Allan Poe and Sam Simon are credited for The Raven, of course, because it is Edgar Allan Poe's poem, basically. So he is, he only did 1 episode here in 1990. And then Sam Simon would only write on 8 episodes between 1989 and when he left the show in 1993. But because he is one of the creators alongside Matt Groening and James L. Brooks, he is still credited on every episode of the show, even continuing past his passing in 2015. So shout out to Sam Simon there. Episode 2 was written by Al Jean, who had 24 episodes. He's another one from that really highlights from the golden era. But he, while he was largely in like the golden era of The Simpsons, he did have at least an episode as recently as 2020. Because his tenure goes from 1990 to 2020. Mike Rice did 10 episodes between 1990 and 1997. Jeff Martin did 14 episodes between 1990 and 2021. George Meyer did 12 episodes between 1990 and 2001. And then we've already talked about them, but Sam Simon and John Schwartzwelder also worked on this second episode. And then third episode, a lot of returning favorites: Al Jean, Mike Rice, Jay Kogan, Wallace Wolodarski, and Sam Simon. And then one new voice on that third episode, John Vitti, who would go on to do 34 episodes between 1990 and 2004. Admittedly, this is even a little out of date now. But as of whenever I pulled this information together, the starring Dan Castellaneta, of course, as Homer, has done 730 episodes. I believe this is like probably 1 or 2 episodes shy of what IMDb would currently show now. But yeah, 730 episodes. Julie Kavner as Marge is not in one of those somewhere, because she is only credited for 729 episodes. Nancy Cartwright as Bart is also up there at the full run, 730 episodes. Yeardley Smith as Lisa is missing from 2 episodes because she is at 728. Hank Azaria, who plays Mo and a number of other characters, comes in at 718 episodes. He was kind of he was the last one of like the original crew kind of brought on to the show. Like I think he has a handful of appearances in the first season and then becomes a regular by season 2. And the last one, Harry Shearer, who plays Lenny and a number of other characters, also credited in every episode, 730 episodes. Couple other voices across these 3 episodes. Of course, in the first one, we get James Earl Jones playing a different character in each of the sequences, and has done 3 episodes of The Simpsons altogether, including one of those. He's like the voice of Maggie in another Treehouse of Horror episode, I believe. So we will probably like revisit him in a year or 2. And then 3 other actors I want to shout out here. Maggie Roswell, who plays Helen Lovejoy. et al. Has done 253 episodes. Marsha Wallace, who played Edna Krabappel, did 172 episodes before her passing in 2013, which I believe is also, I believe they retired Edna Krabappel in that time. And then Russie Taylor played Martin Prince and had done 194 episodes again before her passing in 2019. She also known as the voice of Minnie Mouse for many, many years. And that lovely story because her and the voice of Mickey Mouse were married. So shout out to the kind of women utility players of The Simpsons for all those years. When we do Simpsons episodes, I like to kick things off with the chalkboard message and the sofa gag, but Treehouse of Horror episodes, like almost notoriously, don't have those. So because we get the alternate intros on these three. I believe
third one.
I believe eventually we're going to get to like where it doesn't do the graveyard sequence anymore.
Yes.
But
that's gonna stop in 2 or 3.
Yeah. But yeah.
The third Treehouse of Horror episode does technically have a sofa gag. They're all skeletons.
Yeah.
When it pans from the cemetery into the home as it starts.
All right, Logan, you got me on that one.
So it has one. I just watched it before we started recording. That's why the third one is so fresh in my mind. Yeah, it has that at least. So one of the 3 had it.
I really like the cemetery gag though, especially as like a replacement because I love all the different tombstones.
Yeah.
And it's funny now going back that they're like some of them are just kind of like dated and kind of like weird, but it's just because it was like I love the one that says Elvis. And then I watched the 4th Treehouse of Horrors episode too, and not to spoil it, but there's another tombstone that says Elvis again, and then it just says seriously, you have to accept it. And I just like I thought it was funny that they just like they get so much mileage out of these quick like tombstone jokes.
Yeah.
I also like the fact that they all start with Marge or Homer telling kids not to watch. That started from a genuine place with the first one.
Yeah.
And then they were like, all right, no one did it, so we're just gonna like riff on this now, right?
Yep.
And in the same, like I did some research myself on the Treehouse of Horror because I was really hooked on it. And they also ended up phasing that out because it was actually really hard to write those.
Yeah, it becomes really hard to write the same kind of joke over and over again. Same with the cemeteries. Yeah.
Yep, that's exactly right. Yeah, they're just like, this is actually really hard to make this, and that's why like when you get to the third Treehouse of Horror on like the last one of these 3, there are significantly fewer gravestones that they run past than in the first 2.
Yeah,
it's like, oh, it's hard to make these jokes.
Yeah, as it is, like the in the first episode, we don't get the like spooky names that have become like a staple of the Treehouse of Horror episodes.
That was also weird.
Those start kind of in episode 2, and then like have continued on. And even there, I don't think like the cast starts getting those until like 3 or maybe even beyond that. And it was just like the writers and the creators initially. But yeah, the the first episode I think also is the only one that actually has like the treehouse like as the framing device.
Yes.
And they just kind of kept the name moving forward for the anthology series. But yeah, like the first one is the only one that's actually like them in the treehouse telling the scary stories to each other.
Even that, like you talked about at the beginning of the episode, like these are pointedly not called Treehouse of Horror at the time.
Yeah.
That is a retroactive title. Like they don't start calling it that until like 9 or 10. I think it's a few years down the road before they actually start calling it Treehouse of Horror.
No, they
like, on the episode itself.
They start with episode 2, calling it the Treehouse of Horror, I believe.
Well, the credit maybe it's different. I wonder because like the credit one I saw had it as like Simpsons like Halloween special like 2 and 3 still, at least for the 3 I saw.
Yeah, I think I mean like they're like the episode name has always been Treehouse of Horror, but I think with episode
like
2 maybe
crawl.
3. Yeah, maybe it's 3 that starts out. Yeah, the first one is definitely like the Simpsons Halloween special or whatever. And admittedly, yeah, it's been a couple weeks since I watched these, so it may not have. But yeah, a little bit of other trivia in here across each episode. In the first Treehouse of Horror, Matt Groening was nervous about The Raven because it did not have many gags and felt it would be, quote, the worst, most pretentious thing they had ever done on the show. And before I had done that, one of my notes in here is in the Raven sequence, definitely something written by a team of Harvard grads. Like I basically absolutely agree, especially just knowing the history of that show, that yep, that is absolutely what was going on there. Was these pretentious elitist kind of thing. We're like, we're gonna jam in some actual culture, but through the lens of The Simpsons.
It's great. It works.
Oh yeah, no, agreed. Paul McCartney's gravestone is a reference to the Paul is Dead hoax of the 1960s. According to the DVD commentary, Kang and Kodo's evil nature would have been revealed with Matt Groening's original intention that the book's final title be revealed to be How to Cook for 40 Humans and Then Eat Them. I almost like... It was one that I think I knew that trivia, so like I was waiting for that like final gag to come out, because that's one of those like iconic. I love that bit of like how to cook humans, how to cook for humans, how to cook for 40 humans, how to cook for 40 humans. Like just the creative like use of that reveal is like one of my favorite forms of jokes that we definitely don't get a ton of, but like I like going all the way back to this episode, like I just love that gag.
It's one of my favorite things too, in the fact that having like, again, that could have been an episode I'd seen before, but I don't think so, where like I love the fact that they are just like, it ends them just being good dudes and not actually trying to eat them. And then it just leads to like the Simpsons getting to like riff on Lisa at the end for just like always ruining everything nice. Is like such a cool twist on like where you think it's gonna go.
There's also a trivia thing on Kang and Kodos in particular. They have appeared in every Treehouse of Horror to date, and for the longest time they were not technically canon characters because they only appeared in the Treehouse of Horror episodes, but then they have since appeared in like a canon episode of The Simpsons outside of the Treehouse of Horror series. I don't remember. Yeah. In the episode The Man Who Came to Be Dinner, Kang and Kodos have one of their few canon appearances where the Simpsons end up on Rigel 7, where Kang and Kodos give them a tour with a brief look at their life cycle before placing them in a zoo with Homer to be eaten in a yearly ritual. Like, so all that happens outside of a Treehouse of Horror episode. But yeah, it's like just one of those fun little like kind of traditions is seeing Kang and Kodos show up, so much so that they're the image that I'm including in the video version of the episode here. And yeah, as I said, this is the only Treehouse of Horror episode to be set in the treehouse. For episode 2, trivia that we have is this was the first Treehouse of Horror episode to have been actually broadcast on Halloween, as I mentioned earlier. This would not happen again until The Simpsons Treehouse of Horror 10 in 1999, which was part of season 11, because again, the first season did not have a Treehouse of Horror episode. There was a debate about whether to include Kang and Kodos in all the Halloween specials after this episode, and eventually the writers did agree to make it a tradition. When Kang and Kodos' ship lands on the statue of Jebediah Springfield in episode 2, the statue's head falls off as the rest of the statue falls over, as a reference to The Simpsons' The Telltale Head from, I think, earlier that season or the previous season. In the opening, a group of trick-or-treaters walk by wearing sheets. They are all dressed in the same costumes the Peanuts characters wear in It's the Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brown. And yeah, so episode 2 here is the only Treehouse of Horror where titles for the segments don't appear. Because yeah, in that first episode we got kind of each of the titles broken out, and then in the following one we do as well, as has become kind of tradition. Then in Treehouse of Horror episode 3, the names it used in Bart's spell book when he's casting from the dead, he uses Cullen, Rayburn, Nartz, and Treadbeck, which are the last names of game show hosts. Then he uses Zabar, Kresge, Caldor, and Walmart, the names of past and present department stores. Kojak, Mannix, Banachek, Dano, names of 1970s TV detectives, and Trojan, Ramses, Magnum, and Chic, brand names of condoms. Love that. One of the all-time best lines of any Simpsons episode, the
Yeah.
"He was a zombie?" line was created by Mike Rice, and is, in the opinion of the writers, one of the all-time classic lines from the series.
So good. It lands so well.
Yeah, pitch perfect. At the Halloween party throughout, the costumes are Homer as Julius Caesar, until, of course, his toga rips on a nail. Bart is Alex DeLarge from A Clockwork Orange. Lisa is the Statue of Liberty. Marge is Cleopatra. Milhouse is Radioactive Man. Nelson is Pirate. Martin is Calliope, the muse of heroic poetry. Janie is Princess. Lewis is Frankenstein's monster. Richard is Scratchy. Becky is Arabian Princess. And Wendell is an astronaut. When Marge looks at the advert newspaper in King Homer, the advert above her is the one placed in the song "Escape," aka the Pina Colada song, and does have it's like seeking someone who likes pina coladas and getting caught in the rain or something like that.
That's awesome. I never know that, and I totally missed that on like the rewatch.
Yeah,
that's great.
When I saw that, I went back and like freeze framed it, and I'm like, yep, it's not like written as like just a copy of the lyrics. It's written as if it was a personal ad, but it's those same kind of key things. And then the last little bit of trivia in here, Al Jean was quite worried about the King Homer segment because it was the longest running black and white segment they had ever aired on the show. And he thought that some people might be concerned that their televisions were broken, which is just, that's the state of 90s television.
1992, right? Yeah.
So yeah, what do we think? How do these hold up? We can just dive kind of straight into favorite moments and all that stuff. Frank, hit me with your thoughts first.
Yeah, I really liked it. And I really liked all 3 episodes. And I mean, as I mentioned, I also watched the 4th episode, which I think was my favorite, because I think as they kind of go through them, they got kind of stronger at like writing some of the jokes and just writing some of the bits. Like I said, I liked it all, and I think they're all great, but I definitely thought like, it was like, oh, okay, I can see where they get more of the like the characters and even just more of the like understanding of how to use the Treehouse of Horror like framing to do like funny bits and jokes and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I definitely I enjoyed it. And like I said before too, it was a good like nostalgia trip to go back and just kind of like revisit these episodes. It hit me during the first episode, during the initial house kind of sequence, where I was like, I guess I haven't seen this one. I don't really remember it. And then when they get kicked out of the house, I was like, doesn't the house explode? And then the house like picks up and like started engulfing itself and like, and I was like, okay, yeah, I definitely remember this now. And then the whole alien kind of setup of the next one, I completely remembered from even the outset. Like, I love the bit where they have to pick up Homer using multiple tractor beams.
Yeah.
Like they're kind of like stuck pulling him and they have to use multiple. And that was one where I was like, I definitely remember that. And I remember that kind of whole bit. So it was just like, there was that fun kind of mix of nostalgia, and then also get to viewing it through like a new lens. Cause like we were talking about before too, like it's weird to see some of the other references and some things that I might definitely didn't click like when I was a kid. And even this isn't even a crazy one, but seeing Bart as the kid from A Clockwork Orange, I was like, that's so just wild and random. And like, I don't think that meant anything to me as a kid, but as an adult now, I was like, why is he a Clockwork Orange?
Yeah. That's another one that like, when I eventually would see images from A Clockwork Orange, I was like, oh, like Bart's costume from that Treehouse of Horror episode. Like I definitely saw it here first, and then down there. I think it might be fun to just kind of go through episode by episode as we dive into these. So yeah, that first one absolutely has Bad Dream House, Hungry Are the Damned, and then the Raven sequence. Logan, any standout bits or just sequences from that one?
Yeah, so the first episode, maybe controversially, is my favorite of the 3, actually. I really liked the first episode. It really clicked with me. In particular, the first 2 segments. I think the Raven is weird as shit, and it's great. Like, it's just them embracing like how smart they are, and I love it.
And I mean, you're not going to get much better than having James Earl Jones narrating the Raven.
I also really like the Bart Raven too. Like that, like the Raven is Bart. Like I like that design a lot.
That's what I've actually already like, because I've already made the thumbnail for this episode, and it's like it's Homer grabbing the Bart Raven.
But for me, the house one and then like the alien one, I think both of those are so good. Like the alien one in particular, I think is my favorite segment of the 3 for the first episode. And I think it's just so smart and so clever. I love the fact that it's a twist ending, even if they originally were going to go the other way. The fact that they don't just works so well. I love the fact that it's a great example to be like Lisa's intelligence is her own downfall kind of thing here, and like how emotionally upset and like Marge's like throwaway line of like, for a superior species, they really like all the different like things they do in that episode and that segment I think works so well, and like the flow of that first episode I totally loved. The fact that it is centered in the treehouse, them telling horror stories to one another, like trying to like one up each other. The like final gag of like Homer being the other one who's scared and has nightmares is great.
Yeah.
I think that like throughout that first episode is like, oh, I get immediately why this would become a tradition and like a classic thing. Like it's so ingrained instantly. And then for the home, I love the scene in the home where like they're all in a circle chasing each other with a knife, and then Marge walks in and has like made a sandwich for herself. Is like such a funny gag. Like we've done a lot of things from but we've gotten to a knife fight. Like I think watching all three of the episodes, but in particular that first, and I was like, damn, this show is really well written. Like it's just like such a smart show, and like all three of those episodes in the first episode I think like knocked out of the park in terms of the writing and the performances.
Yeah, one of the other elements I think is something that like the Simpsons got to do because they were doing this was like these episodes in particular a lot of times are pulling in like the Twilight Zone kind of vibes and like I mean some of them are just like complete like they just pulled a plot from a Twilight Zone story, especially as we get into some of the later ones. But it was like that happening, at a time where like the Twilight Zone was 20, 30 years old, like had been off the air for or was like maybe on like Nick at Night or occasionally in syndication at this kind of time. And so it was like getting to reintroduce that kind of storytelling and just anthology storytelling in general, in a way that certainly also hadn't been done in like animated forms and stuff like that. So it was like I love elements like that. In particular, from this first episode, the bad dream house, like the are you my conscience? Yes I am. Yes. Like that the house just like playing along. The Homer calling the realtor to be like, you didn't tell me this was built on a burial ground. He mentioned it 5 or 6 times. It's just like a perfect Homer just missing that.
Also, Marge being a mom to the house, just like yelling at it and like put in its place.
Yep.
Great.
And then the final like closing beat there of the house deciding to destroy itself instead of living with the Simpsons is pitch perfect.
I do really love that part, and I love what Lisa's response where she's like, that kind of hurts.
Yeah, exactly. Like because she's the only one self-aware enough to realize that that's a dig at them. In The Hungry Are the Damned, one of the first things that jumped out at me was it's Bart telling that story, I think. And he says a macabre tale instead of a macabre tale, which like is just one of those jokes that I definitely wouldn't have gotten at the time, but as I've like grown up and just know words now, I appreciated that little thing. That's
also a great Bart joke too.
Yeah. Well, we already mentioned the 2 tractor beams needed for Homer, of course, is great. I love that, like all these years later, an HBO joke about the cost of HBO still resonates and still makes just as much sense. I loved Marge Simpson's review of Pong. Your game is very nice. It's great there. This is like I didn't catch, or I heard it in the first one, but I was like, is that James Earl Jones? It's definitely James Earl Jones when we get that third, the non-Kanger Kodos alien. And then again, the How to Cook Humans like runner is just so wonderful, and I like because it breaks the rule of 3, which is the tried and true comedy rule, by doing a 4th one. And like knowing that 5th one could have been in there, I almost like am sad it wasn't. And then as I mentioned, I love just the Raven and the clever ideas of having like the second portrait for the tip of Marge's hair / Lenore's hair. And then just the closing little bit there of Homer clearly being the one who got the most scared by these things. Because of course, of course, a poem isn't going to scare Bart, and of course, a poem is the most scary story kind of thing that Lisa would tell. So
I do love to go back to The Hunger and the Damned. Two gags that no words are really said in either one, but I just like loved them. Or Homer spending a solid minute of actual time just like pouring lighter fuel onto the grill.
Mhm.
Great, just like over and over again. Like I like thought he was gonna stop 3 different times, and he kept going. I was like, that's fucking brilliant.
Mhm.
And then the bit
And it
where,
gets me at the end when the last one is like really, really, really big.
Yeah.
Like he gives it everything he can, and
Everything
it
he's
fills the
got.
whole like grill
the
with it.
nuclear blast. And then maybe the funniest thing in the entire episode to me was when the whole bit where the aliens are like showing off Pong, and like they're like, oh, this isn't, we had this like 30 years ago. And then the aliens get really upset and say, who here's invented like intergalactic travel? And then Bart slowly raises his hand and gets like smacked down by Homer. Is like, I fucking died.
Yeah.
Like I laughed so hard at that bit. It was so like, because what made it so good too is like they gave it a beat, right? Like just the aliens raise their hand and it focused on the Simpsons for like 10 seconds and no one did anything, and then Bart just like slowly crept it up, and it's such a good it's such a good moment.
Mm-hmm. So on to Treehouse of Horror episode 2. I'll start this one off. I love kind of the intro little bit of where we get like to see Jimbo and Kearney. Of course, a couple of those like iconic bully characters. And like the fact that of course they're going to actually egg the house, and sure enough, they egg the house as well. I love Bart and Lisa's costumes here as the execution, because again, this is the framework of this episode is like Marge cursing them with nightmares, and so they go up and they go to sleep and each have their nightmares. But yeah, and also it was immediately reminiscent of the conversation that Jazz and I had of like trading candy and stuff that they had. Then while this episode doesn't title the sequences, I went in through kind of names in there. Of course, Lisa's Dream, we get the monkey's paw sequence. And I had completely forgotten the joke about like the shop disappearing in the dust storm, where like it like Homer looks away and then looks back and there's the dust storm. He's like, oh no, it was over there. And then the camera just pans over and the guy's just like, so such a great thing there. Like that there is like admittedly an element of like, maybe that like racial stereotyping kind of character wouldn't fly today, but hey, also at least like Hank Azaria is like no longer playing Apu and stuff like that. So The Simpsons, gets trying to kind of keep up with the times. But yeah, this is certainly where I got introduced to like this kind of like be careful what you wish for storytelling. I love that Maggie's wish, the only one admittedly that goes like right until Flanders gets it, is just a new pacifier, something simple. And she gets that. Bart's wish for The Simpsons to be rich and famous is a lovely meta commentary joke about how already here, only 3 seasons in, how over merchandised and overproduced The Simpsons were in those early years. Like they were fucking everywhere. I have somewhere in a box somewhere, probably at my parents' house, I have like an entire Simpsons trading card collection that I remember like, much like people these days are getting like Pokemon boxes, like I bought an entire box of the Simpsons trading cards, and just like spent a week just like opening those kind of one by one. And this would have been like super early, but it was it was definitely like an element there.
Because this is before Bart would even be like a superhero, right? Like this would be like before like Bartman.
No, Bart
I think happened.
Bart Simpson do the Bartman was like 90 or 91. So it was like around this time. Like I mean, I talked about it. I
remember that like it being an explosive thing. Yeah.
Yeah. I talked about it in because for Thanksgiving last year I did basically like Bart versus Thanksgiving that episode, and in that episode, which was I think season 2, like they have a cutaway to the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade where a blimp of Bart is like going, and it was like that aired the day that Bart debuted in the Macy's Thanksgiving Day parade, and that was like this took off out the gate and blew up everywhere. And so yeah, like in their second season, Bart was already afloat in the Thanksgiving Day parade and stuff.
Yeah, Bart was huge.
And yeah, like Do the Bartman was like a #1 single in like many countries. Not ironically not in the US because they did not release it as a single here. But like even that, I have somewhere in like an old CD collection at least three CDs of just Simpsons music from like over the years. And so yeah, they were just super all over the place. Like my credit to my mom, who's probably where I get some of like my artistic just kind of like flair and talent from. She, I remember, made a like she took a basically like a bandsaw, and she made like handmade clocks for my sister and I growing up. And I had a Bart Simpson clock, like
Nice.
just a wooden clock that she like made in the shape of Bart, as well as like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and
Nice.
That's
maybe
awesome.
maybe some others or something like that. But like I remember having like a Bart Simpson handmade and hand painted wooden clock that my mom made, and then like basically like drilled in the clock parts, like in my room, in my like my room growing up, and it's like I thought of that, 20 years later when I'm working in a scene shop as a scenic carpenter and using a bandsaw for the first time. Like, my mom did this like 15 years ago for me and my sister. I don't remember what my sister had, but like she had her own clocks as well. But yeah, like, but my mom did that rather than like go out and buy, some extra Bart Simpson merch of us. But yeah, like, also that just reminded me, I had a self-made comic strip at some point. I think maybe this was in middle school. Yeah, it was in middle school for my Spanish class. Like we were supposed to do a Spanish newsletter or something like that. I don't remember what it was, but like I decided to like do a comic strip, and my comic strip was a Bart Simpson prank where he's calling Mo, and he basically asks for like, yes, is Juan there? Can I get Juan Cerveza? And so that was my cute little Simpsons en Mexico joke. But yeah. So yeah, continuing on, like I love that we get Lisa's wish being world peace, and then of course Kang and Kodos make their return appearance to like take everything over. And then there was a second there where I was like, I remember Homer's going to make a really stupid wish, but I don't remember what it was. And then as soon as he starts talking about the turkey sandwich, it's like, oh, that's right. It's going to be dry. And that's how this one's going to be cursed. I just love, cause he includes that, like, that, and don't fuck with me kind of clause. Like, I don't want this to be a cursed turkey or whatever. But it being dry is still gets him. And then, yeah, Flanders gets to cap that one
Saves
off.
the day. Yeah.
Love that. So I've talked enough about this one. I'll circle back around to some of my other ones there, but I want to throw it to somebody else. So Frank, hit me with your thoughts on this episode in general.
Yeah, I love this episode too, and especially like you had mentioned there, I think my favorite part was that like meta commentary on the popularity of The Simpsons, and it was interesting to me that like like you said, this was so early, and they were already dealing with that, and it's been like 30 years since then, and they're still like huge and on top. Because by the time I would have saw this, they were still huge, and I still was buying merchandise. And like when you were talking about some of the ones you had, I even remember I had like the Homer Simpson phone, where he was sitting in like the chair, and then the back of the chair was like the phone, and he would wake up when it rang. Like I had all this like random Simpsons merch. And so I'm like, I think it's so like, that was so funny to me when it's like the one lady's like, I'm so tired of hearing about The Simpsons. And then like the one guy's like, I'm not going to pay $18 for a shirt. And he was like a shirt with Bart on it. And like all that like killed me. That was like my favorite part of this like second episode, I think. And I also do love I did love the gag you mentioned too with the shop kind of disappearing and just being over to the left. And I really love the setup of like they just kind of screw everything up, and then Flanders gets it and everything just goes totally right, because that's just totally Flanders. And I love when he goes back in his house and he's like, I better upgrade this house, and it just becomes like a giant castle.
Yeah. How about you, Logan?
Yeah, I think the second episode is my least favorite of the three.
Mm-hmm.
I think that for me, it wasn't as consistent as the first or the third episode, but there were tiny moments throughout that I really loved. You guys have talked a lot about the monkey paw episode, but like I think that the episode where with like Homer basically becoming Frankenstein has a lot of really funny like throwaway one-liners. Pretty much by like every character gets at least like one great one in that episode. The like gag reveal of like him being connected at the end and it's a dream or is it kind of thing, and the maniacal laughter is like a great like horror story ending.
Even has like a post-credit sequence. Yeah,
and like I think, you know, I love the slow evolution of everyone slowly ending up in Homer and Marge's bed at the end of the episode because they keep having nightmares, and like you act like Homer's the one who has a nightmare too, but he got like bit by Bart instead, and that's what wakes him up. Like I think it's all those kind of small moments throughout that do it for me. But like pretty much consistently, anytime we get anything from Mr. Burns, I'm here for it. And that whole storyline of him trying to create a Frankenstein's monster was so good, right? And like when they're dragging his body out of the thing and it's like, sir, I think I might still be alive. He just takes the shoulder shots, beating the shit out of Homer. And it's like, is that good for you now? It was like such a great like Mr. Burns line. Just like watching Homer be like, let's fire him, like let's be done with it. What? How do you know I'm not doing my job? We're watching you on the camera. All right. Like it was another like such a good like there was so many just funny lines in that one. Like I think that was my like strongest segment of the episode for me.
I think it's also
yeah, like,
I think there was a trivia thing that's also like since if you don't count Burns's head being attached to Homer, it's also I think one of the like a rare Treehouse segment where nobody dies.
So this is what I was going to talk about actually at like when we give it to grade. I found these 3 episodes all like taken together really interesting because they are remarkably bloodless. There's not a lot of like no one dies in the first episode that I can remember at all, right? And then even in the second episode, it's like really like low on the body count if anyone dies, right? And so like no one really dies in the first like Lisa segment with the monkey paw. No one dies in the one with Bart in his dream, and then like in the Homer episode too, like Homer dies, I guess, but then he gets brought back to life. So like he doesn't really die. Like it's incredible like how little people die, even in the third episode, versus where this series is gonna go, right? And like how incredibly bloody and gory it will get. And I was like, oh man, this is like almost really refreshing how like much more kind of like simple the stories are and like the body counts are. And I, like that's why I said like I really enjoyed these 2 episodes and how different they're going to be from the series becomes. Because the series is definitely going to hit like an inflection point. And so it's really interesting to see this version of Treehouse of Horror stories that I sort of like more at times. And versus where we'll go.
As I mentioned, the second sequence there, Bart's dream, is basically a riff on a Twilight Zone episode of, I believe it was called It's a Good Life. And that's the one, of course, where Bart just has like, you know, mind powers. And so everybody's trying to like keep him happy and keep him pleasant. That's admittedly, I think that's my least favorite of the segments, just because like, I agree. It just doesn't have a ton of stand-up moments, and it doesn't use Bart in like the like I think Bart is just inherently a much more mischievous character and would absolutely be like doing more things to mess with everybody. The imagery of Homer as a jack-in-a-box certainly is something that like I would remember for many, many years to come and stuff. But yeah, it's just kind of one of those like, it didn't like, it's an interesting premise that I don't feel like they executed as well as they could have on.
Takes a really sweet turn at the end.
Yeah.
And I like that that's what like causes his, or that's the nightmare
that's
to
exactly,
him. That he has like a good relationship with Homer and he's like,
that is the, admittedly, like that is the payoff to the whole sequence is that being, you know, Bart's biggest nightmare.
In that one, I also did like the gag of they have to go off his test results, and that becomes like history. So America becomes Bonerland.
Mm-hmm.
And then specifically, what was funny to me about that is later when he goes to see the therapist doctorate thing says Bonerland, like he's like a therapist of Bonerland,
Nice,
and like.
That.
Yeah, it's like on his door when they show it to him, is that like it says that now. So I'm like, I thought that was really funny. It's just like a quick like callback to like earlier in that part.
Yeah.
And I also
enjoyed that. I was just gonna say
Go
like
ahead.
that America was discovered by someone, or, like by some guy.
Yeah.
Discovered America was such a great, yeah.
I liked in that kind of setup. I'm pretty sure it was for that one. The intro is kind of like an Unsolved Mysteries or like Are You Afraid of the Dark? Like it kind of has that like, isn't it? It's like I believe it's that one. It's like submitted for the approval of what, and it just kind of like tells the tale of like the setup. I thought that was really cool. And like watching
for that dream, yeah.
Because like when you watch these all together, it's cool how they're so different, even in like the setups and like just going through the story. So I thought that was a really cool one of like, oh, that's like an Unsolved Mysteries, Are You Afraid of the Dark kind of like setup, like the guy
Twilight
getting
Zone,
this narrator to come in. Yeah, Twilight Zone's even probably like a better one. I'm just consulting my notes here before we move on. I also did want to give a shout out to there's a Radio Shack shout out in the episode.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like that's great.
R.I.P.
And besides that, I also did I like the setup of them having the nightmares because of the candy. Like I thought that's like a cool, fun setup. And a tangent I don't want to get into and take too long, but a story I wanted to tell y'all is like, so when I was in school, we had to write stories for like English class or whatever, and it was around Halloween. And it had to be like, was it nonfiction? So like it actually happened. You were supposed to write like something from your Halloween past. And I was having a hard time with that because I was like, especially back then, really imaginative, like a fiction writer. So I wrote my story as like a kid who ate too much candy and then goes and has a nightmare. And then I basically wrote like a horror story that was like fiction. And that was totally fine. Everybody loved it. It was great. And then going back and watching this, I was like, did I get that from Treehouse of Horrors? Like,
did I just rip this off?
Did I just plagiarize The Simpsons?
Like, and I didn't mean to, because I definitely didn't like do it on purpose. But watching this, I was like, oh my God, that was my idea. And I was like, but I know I had to have seen this. So I'm like, I must have just like subconsciously was like, yeah, that's a great idea.
The Simpsons went back in time and plagiarized Frank. That's what it was.
Yeah. No, or your teacher, like it would have been great if your teacher wrote like just as the feedback, The Simpsons did it first.
Yeah.
I would have become the South Park supervillain that Butters becomes.
Exactly. Yeah.
If that was the case.
Yeah. I also want to shout out one of the standout jokes from the Frankenstein one for me is just the many of the writers have talked about how like Smithers and Burns or Burns in particular is like their favorite character to write for, because he is so like over the top and you could just be nuts with him. But in particular, I love that like as soon as Burns is like, well, I could use your brain, Smithers immediately is happy to sacrifice Homer. Just be like, nope, he's good. So yeah, shout out to that one. So let's move on to Treehouse of Horror number 3, where we get the sequences Clown Without Pity, King Homer, and Dial Z for Zombies. All again with the framework of a Halloween party where they're telling scary stories to one another. So who wants to kick this one off? Logan, I think you can kick this one off. Yeah.
I just want to give an immediate shout out to my favorite gag in the whole episode up to this one, which is in King Homer whenever they capture Homer. Yeah, Homer gets knocked out from like the gas grenade basically. Mm-hmm. And then Mr. Burns, again, with Smithers, it's always them two together. It's like, Smithers, when we get back, I'm going to give you a raise. And immediately gets eaten by Homer. And he goes, oh, well. Yep. It's like, again, fucking died laughing at that line. And like how well like executed it's done. Like that's my favorite single moment from the whole episode. Even if the King Homer one outside of that, I thought was like fine. Mm-hmm. I think it's like a really good retelling of King Kong. Like it is like beat for beat. It is like there, like, I literally got to watch and was like, man, that is like a, 12-minute recap of the movie that makes you not need to see the movie at all. You got everything good to get the movie in 12 minutes instead of 2.5 hours, Peter Jackson. But the other two segments on either side of it, I thought were each great. But yeah, that standalone Mr. Burns and Smithers moment was like just aces.
Yeah. What do you think, Frank?
Yeah, I'm kind of with you there because I definitely like that one. The King Homer was like a little bit weaker for me. It's just like
Sure.
as kind of one of the segments. But I think you're right. Like it's a really good retelling of the story they're trying to retell
Yeah.
and using the Simpsons and like the
Yeah,
setup
to
of
do
the
it.
characters they have. And there was some funny bits. Like I like when he eats. Was it Lenny and he or Carl? And he's just like Homer, stop eating. Like he like pops out just to like say that like. And I also like to your thing when it's Burns and Smithers when I like that Burns like misses the grenade and then is like high from it and is like dancing around and then Smithers has to actually like throw the grenade that takes out Homer and like that was just another like dumb funny bit of just watching him dance in this like super dumb way. Like I that one got me because when he starts dancing, I thought it was like an animation mistake. I was like, wow, that looks really weird, and I was like, oh, he's dancing.
Yeah, he's just
Um,
frail old Burns doing a frail old Burns dance.
that reminds me. Now you're gonna make me do another King Homer thing, but like whenever Homer is like, I also like how like much fun they made of the idea of the fact that like who would find a like 3 hour show of just like King Kong tied up fun,
Hmm.
and they made like so many jokes about that. But like the idea of like when they were getting all the pictures of him taken, and Marge's like, "Stop it! You scared him." And they go, "What is he gonna do? Rampage and destroy downtown Springfield?" And then like that's exactly what happens, obviously. And it's like that was such a good. And then like he immediately breaks out and goes like, "Oh no!" Like it was such a great little like beat of like obviously that's what's gonna happen. Like they could do a lot of really cool like funny foreshadowing bits in King Homer because obviously everyone knows how King Kong ends, even if you've never seen the movie or movies. And so, yeah, I thought those are some clever parts of that as well.
But yeah, that's I
Oh,
mean,
yeah.
while staying on King Homer, like I love that they subvert the ending of King Homer of like he like it's Homer, so of course he can't climb to the top of the Empire State Building, and he gets winded and just falls off early, and not in a mortal way, but because he's also not being like taken out by planes and stuff. Like he survives and then just marries Marge, and they live happily ever after as a tweak on that story is another fun little twist. Yeah, Frank.
No, I was just gonna give the same shout out that I thought that bit was really funny. Even when you see like because he's like exuding the effort to try to climb up, and then it like does that pan out, and he's like 2 feet off the ground, and he just kind of like falls backwards. Like
Mhm.
I love that.
Yeah. Or so I have two other jokes that I want to shout out here. Another Smithers bit. Of course, Smithers having a line, "I think women and semen don't mix." Like, definitely went over my head as a kid, but then as as you become more aware of Smithers as a character, just like that's a fun gag that they snuck in there. And then I also love the Candy Apple Island. Well, what do they got there?
Oh,
Apes,
yeah.
apes, but they're not so big.
That was a really good one.
It was
Yeah.
very good.
And yeah, the because it takes Homer so long to try and climb the thing, the planes that are flying overhead are like, "Ah, man, we got to go refuel." So they just leave. Fun little bit. I also want to shout out in the framing device of this. I love the sequence of Marge doing that like typical Halloween party thing of like passing around the food and like saying it's like witch's eyes or witches, and then like the other kids at the end of the thing just being like, "Well, we haven't gotten anything yet," and you just find out Homer's been eating everything when it gets to him. Of course, perfect. I will say with the clown without pity sequence, like this is an element of so many of the like they've done so many of these stories that they start to blur together, because I went through that whole sequence waiting for like can't sleep, clown will eat me, from Bart, which is clearly just in a later episode or in a different in a different story and not in this one. Because yeah, this was the one, of course, where the Krusty doll just has the yep, there's your problem. Someone set this thing to evil. Just that's the setting on the doll, of course. But it also has the iconic "My Baloney Has a First Name" song that like I would sing for years and years and years. Anytime really a bologna sandwich got brought up as an idea, like it wasn't, as Oscar Mayer as the original song was. It was, a Homer. The the "that's good, that's bad, that's good, that's bad" sequence at the like the haunted store of curios or whatever. A fun little bit
And
there.
I love the way it builds though too. That we're at the end when he's like, "That's bad," and he's like, "Can I go?"
Yeah. Yeah, or like, yeah, he doesn't know if the last one is bad or not, and the guy's like, that's bad. Yeah. And then the final one, the Dial Z for Zombies, we have is the Return of the Living Dead parody.
Yeah, it's excellent.
I like this, like, reminded me of that whole like Snowball 1 versus Snowball 2 thing, which I like had forgotten all these years later. But yeah, they want to bring back Snowball 1, but it's all so you think it's gonna go down the route of Pet Cemetery, but no. He brings back everybody, of course, and again, that the most iconic "he was a zombie" bit is lovely. And then the wonderful meta joke at the end of "I'm glad we didn't turn into mindless zombies," as they all sit down and watch the TV.
Homer's line of like, "He fell, that's funny," delivered in the way he said it was like so good at the end of the episode.
Yeah.
Like that was probably my second favorite segment over the 3 episodes, along with like the Hungry and the Damned. Like it's so good, and it's the first time really like anyone like dies and is like actually dead, other even than they're zombies, so like you could argue it, I guess, but like of the 3 episodes. And yeah, it is a like action movie episode, and it's awesome. Like Homer like pulling out the shotgun, right, like blowing away like Albert Einstein and like George Washington, and like William Shakespeare with his like last words was just like, so it's such a cool sequence. Like,
admittedly, like when all those guys popped up, I'm like, what are they doing in Springfield?
All the zombies got brought back.
Exactly. Like,
you know
why were they like buried in Springfield?
You know what? Don't even worry about it.
Yeah.
It's got a nice cemetery. And so, yeah, it's just a great segment, I think. And yeah, like you already kind of touched on the trivia, like all the different like spell names being just like random trivia shit. Also very good.
It's like
I didn't catch the first, but the last 2 I definitely was like, they're just like saying.
Yeah, it was like I knew 1 or 2 of them in each sequence.
Yeah.
So I knew enough context to like figure out what they were. But like, yeah, I mean, like the first one of like Cullen, Rayburn, Nars, and Trebek. I'm like, well, I know Trebek, so I know that's game show hosts. And then yeah, like I probably just like I definitely didn't get the Trojan Ramses Magnum Chic one as a kid. But that was that's a wonderful one to like again sneak in there for the parents. And just, you know, that Simpsons writer room. Oh, they are some funny guys.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts there from you, Frank?
Yeah. I did like that one, that episode, or that part of the episode as well. And I thought it had a lot of funny bits, but I did like the ending when the zombies are sort of going back to their graves, and he's like, I'm John Smith, and he's like, are you John Smith 1812? And he's like, oh, my apologies.
Yeah, my apologies. Shakes hands. Yeah.
Like that was so funny to me. Like I know it's so just like dumb and whatever, but like that was just like that was like one of my favorite parts of that whole segment. It's just that stupid like ending bit.
I also like the JFK mayor, who's got a pretty decent like JFK like impression that he's doing for like the mayor.
Oh, Mayor Quimby.
At the end of the episode where they're like, he's all like, and all the zombies are back in their graves or dead on the street, and it's just hands down, like they're all just like on the road. It's like, oh shit, like it was like a really funny like bit as well.
Yep. And I think there was a trivia thing in there that so the Kang and Kodos sequence in this is like actually just the same sequence, like the same animation from the previous one, just without the peace sign removed. Because in the second episode, you have like Kang and Kodos coming because the world peace, and they've got the peace sign, you know, like people standing as peace across America or North America or whatever. And they basically like use that same kind of like establishing shot, but they basically painted out the people to bring them in and be like, maybe we shouldn't go down there, as everybody is turning into zombies. Yeah, good stuff. Standout episodes here. Definitely like very surprised by how well they stood the test of time, honestly. And I think these episodes are even more like able to do that because like obviously we have entire memes around the idea that the Simpsons have predicted so many things accurately.
Yeah.
And I think the reason that a lot of these Treehouse of Horror things stand the test of time is they are telling timeless stories, either that like are stories that they're pulling from kind of a historical sense, and they're just segments that are so like that, like at least for these ones, they're not reliant on like let's make a thing, let's make jokes about a thing at this point in time of like technology or something like that that's obviously going to look dated 30 years later or something like that. I mean, the fact that even again like the Pong joke was already a dated video game at the time, so they were kind of like poking fun at that in and of itself. It's just a lovely bit, and I think they do that incredibly well in these compared to like, you know, a lot of other series that just don't hold up are the ones that are like so reliant on like references or jokes on technology or whatever, because that's obviously changing just by the day. And the like, again, as Simpsons has made pop culture parodies and references of pretty much everything, the fact that especially in these early years they're doing it on things that were already old and well established in pop culture, King Homer, like it's not like that's not a dated thing just because it's a, you know, a dated reference. It was a dated reference at the time, and it's like a reference that they were making because they could, kind of thing. So yeah, shout out to the Simpsons. Yeah,
absolutely.
It definitely holds up a lot better than I remember. They're like one of the later Treehouse of Horror has like a Twilight parody. So it's like the King Homer thing definitely holds up like a lot better than like that when you compare it on like a timeline.
Yeah, but even that, I mean, like that will, I imagine, in like, you know, 15 years that will still hold up because Twilight was like they choose their targets pretty well. Like they're not going for like flash in the pan pop culture things typically. They're typically hitting like we're making fun of this because it's the biggest thing in the world or something like that. So let's dive in and grade it. Do we want to grade each episode individually, or do we want to just kind of grade all three together?
We can do all three together.
Yeah, works for me.
Yeah, that works for me.
So I mean, I'll kick it off at like A+. Honestly, like I think they're all great. They all like stand out really well. And yeah, like even the slight dips in a segment here or there or something like that, like there's still stuff to enjoy in each segment, even if it's not like the best segment overall. So yeah, easy A+ from me. How about you, Frank?
Yeah, I think I agree. I was originally going to go with just an A, but I think you're right. I think I might just go A+ because this is not only is it super nostalgic, these are just like really going back now, even with like a fine tooth layer, you know, with like a lens on it. It's like it's still these like it's really well written. It's funny. It's still like amazing what they were able to pull from and just everything they were able to do. And so that's why I think it's great. And I can't wait to go next year when we can go through like the next chain of the Treehouse of Horrors.
And how about you, Logan?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely give it an A as well. I think I should no longer be surprised, but like I'm constantly so impressed by how good The Simpsons is and how good it still is, right? Like watching these older episodes, like The Simpsons is just really good. Like there is definitely a reason that it's been on for 33 seasons, right? And watching these early episodes, which are kind of forming, you know, obviously the early years of like the quote unquote golden age of The Simpsons, it's like, damn, yeah, like it's just great episodes, and I love what they're doing with it. I love the fact that it is very different from where the show is going to go in terms of like not being super bloody or deadly. And then kind of doing like those like classic horror stories you would see and hear growing up, and doing their own like twists, interpretations on, and like tweaks to. And I think they're all really clever. I think they're chock full of like awesome classic one-liners and throwaway gags and shots. And so, yeah, I would also give it an A.
Yeah. All right. Extra credit. Other suggestions if you like this. We have a bevy of Simpsons related stuff here. We have the Simpsons movie. We have The Good, the Bart, and the Loki, which is a Simpsons short that came out in celebration of the Marvel's Loki series. We have Playdate with Destiny, which is a Simpsons short that came out with one of the movies, as is The Longest Daycare, another Simpsons short. We have The Force Awakens from its nap, which I believe is a Simpsons short that came out, I think, just this last Force Awakens Day, or not Force Awakens, Star Wars Day, May the 4th. And then outside of The Simpsons, we have the recent DuckTales animated series. We have Big City Greens, and we have Gravity Falls are the recommendations that Disney Plus will give you if you decide to watch The Simpsons. Extracurriculars. Anybody watching anything else on Disney Plus?
Not at the moment.
Yeah.
I watched Halloween Town 2 and I watched The Simpsons.
There you go. Yeah, I'm in the same boat. I think the next thing, like the next new thing I'll really be probably hopping in and watching will be like Hawkeye.
Yep.
But yeah, we will. We also got to come up with a few things to talk about for the month of November for Simpsons, but or not for that D Plus show, not for Simpsons. Oh my God, Simpsons is everything. Anyway, well, that is going to do it for this episode of That D Plus Show. Thank you guys for joining me to talk about The Simpsons and specifically these Treehouse of Horror episodes. It's always fun to hop in, and because there just are so many Simpsons episodes, like it's a thing that like if I ever need to fill a week or something like that, and I know like nobody else can join me or something, it's just like, well, I can just pull a random Simpsons episode. I think I did a Thanksgiving centric one, and then I did another episode that was basically just I was pulling a this day in history for like an idea for a show, and it was like, on this day 20 years ago or something, 30 years ago, it was like the Simpsons like Colonel Homer episode, I think is the one I did in that vein. So it's always fun to hop in and just do a random episode of The Simpsons, but this will be a fun little Halloween tradition for us for the foreseeable future as well. You can follow my guests. You can follow Logan at Lefty Logie. Anything you want to give a shout out to, Logan?
I will give a shout out to That News to Care About. Me and Trevor went through what we've been playing recently in the most recent episode. I thought it was pretty good, if I say so myself. And then I will also give a shout out to the YouTube channel over there and all the different Let's Plays and podcasts you can go find going live on youtube.com/thatnerdysite.
Cool. You can follow Frank at Irrelevant Jokes. Anything you want to give a shout out to there, Frank?
Yeah, just a quick shout out to our other podcast, That Nerdy Side Show. The most recent episode that you can find up is our Dune sort of spoiler-free and spoiler-filled thoughts. And then also I also shared some thoughts about Far Cry 6 since I've finally finished that. But I thought it was a good episode and a fun time, so I definitely recommend people check that one out.
Yeah, and I was very excited. The day after I think that went live, they formally greenlit and announced Dune Part 2 is going to happen. So we talked about all three of us on that episode. You, me, and Cam were really hopeful that they were going to do a Dune Part 2 based on just how well we enjoyed their approach to the first part of that story. So
I'm seeing Dune 2 days from recording this podcast at an IMAX.
That's
hell yeah.
I definitely want to try and catch it at IMAX maybe this weekend. And I think Cameron is like down to join me for that. So I will try and touch base with him and see if we can make that happen. Cause yeah, that's definitely one, like I like he and I went and saw it together at our not Alamo, Majestic Phoenix, here in town, is what they go by now. And then I've watched it at least 2 more times, and in this I mean like, I've had it like playing in the background while I've been doing other things on HBO Max. But yeah, I definitely want to go see this in IMAX and just that grandiose spectacle. Yeah, you can follow me at Trevor J. Starkey. I will echo, of course, all of those shout outs, and then I will also give a preemptive shout out to we're about to hit our second anniversary as we dive into year 3 here on November 1st. So stay tuned to the site. We got some potential ideas in the works, and we'll probably be announcing minor tweaks and changes here to a number of things, and then also just in the teases for this particular podcast, we will do another kind of holiday month in December when we get there, and for the month of November, I believe the plan, as it's kind of like in my head right now, will be the first couple weeks will anybody that wants to, we will revisit the Star Wars Visions series, because we only talked about the first 3 episodes of that. So we'll probably do a part 2 and a part 3 for episodes 4 through 6 and then 7 through 9. And then Frank and I have talked occasionally, and we'll probably sit down and just watch the Dinosaurs sitcom, because that has been on Disney Plus for a little while there. And then I believe that will lead us into the episode right after Thanksgiving, which is also coincides with when Hawkeye launches. So we will probably make that the post Thanksgiving episode will be that first, I think it's first 2 episodes of Hawkeye, and I believe that also times out to be the 100th episode of that D Plus show. So got an exciting rest of the year to look forward to.
Absolutely,
because we'll have a handful of fun holiday-y things in December, including sequels to our Santa Claus and Home Alone episodes, where we will do Santa Claus 2 and Home Alone 2. Don't know if we're going to do the new Home Alone movie yet. Might be a lot of Home Alone for 1 month, but maybe it will be certainly timely. But then, a couple other potential ideas in the holiday run of things there. So stay tuned for all that fun 2021 wrap up here on That D Plus Show as we move forward. You follow all of us over at That Nerdy Site, or go to thatnerdysite.com for all the latest from us. Once again, if you liked what you heard, please remember to like, subscribe, rate, review, share the podcast with your friends, all that fun stuff. And if you do feel so inclined, you can support us on Patreon at patreon.com/thatnerdysite. Thank you for joining us. As always, stay nerdy, be good to each other, and class dismissed.